everyone for coming to Research Translation Across AU. I'm Rachel Borchard. I'm on the track team, so I helped organize this. But this session is designed to help inform you about what is research translation and what does that look like across campus. There's a lot of different forms of research translation, and so I think people tend to put it in a more narrow box, so we're here to inspire all of your research and research translation efforts by hearing about some of the successful research translation that's happening. So we'll start with Susanna Campbell, who is the PI of the track grant, to talk about research translation generally and what that looks like. And then we're going to hear from 4 speakers who are currently engaged in research translation. And then we'll convene at the end for questions. So with that, take it away, Susanna.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and thanks for doing this. Hi, everybody. So the Translating Research into Action Center was started a little over 2 years ago with a grant from the U.S. National Science Foundation out of the Accelerating Research Translation Directorate, which is in the Technology and Innovation Partnership Directorate. And it was funded out of the CHIPS and Science Act. So the idea behind this kind of accelerating research translation grants, is to build the capacity of U.S. universities to actually take research and innovation and take it to society, so society can benefit from it. And Jordan Tama, Rachel Burks, and I are all co-PIs on this grant. And basically, somehow we got it, even though we're not traditional tech transfer. And we are still among the 18, now 17 original awardees, the kind of oddball out. And the way that we are trying to use this at AU is to build some core capacities, and I'll talk about some of those, that will feed into a sustained Research Translation Center, probably to be renamed in some way, at AU, that the provost and the broader leadership at AU has committed to helping to sustain. And so what we're trying to do here is to make sure that we use the remainder of this NSF money to build core capacities. And in the next couple years, in the last 2 years of the grant, we really want to engage you much more in helping to amplify the amazing research translation work that actually already exists at AU, and in working with your unit to better support it. So I'm just going to give a brief overview here of, one, the way that we're thinking about it. We have something called the Pathways to Impact with 14 pathways, and I decided not to present it because it's just like a rabbit hole that can be difficult to find your way out of. But basically, this is something that Jordan and I worked on developing with Pauline for a training that we did on co-creation. And what we're looking at here is that when you talk about research translation, there's a big range, right? You can focus just on disseminating your research to scholars, or you can focus on disseminating your research to practitioners, or maybe you want to be involved in being a contractor for a policy organization, producing research for them. Or maybe you want to produce research with practitioners through what is more known as co-creation or research practice partnerships. Or maybe you want to develop a kind of sustained over time partnership, like I feel like we have with NASA is one of these kind of phenomenal partnerships. So I think that what's important here, and what we really want to convey in thinking about research translation, is there are many different ways to do it, and you get to define it, right? You get to define your method and your practice. What we're trying to do as part of TRACK is to learn from you and say, this is what we've learned about the different pathways and approaches, and this is what we've learned from the broader scholarship. A lot of it's in education and health and broader kind of public policy about what effective research translation looks like and how we can measure it and how we can give more value to this really difficult work that is often undervalued. So there are 4 components of the work that we're doing at TRACK. There's education and training, which Jordan is leading. There's seed translation research projects, which we have 1.5 on the panel, and I think we might have some others in the room. There is research on research translation, where we're developing a repository and a kind of broader, this is what the Pathways framework is. We're trying to actually give you all guidance based on research and evidence about the conditions under which this type of engagement is likely to succeed and the conditions under which it may be less likely to succeed. And then broader institutionalization. I think it's a big success of really Diana Burley's efforts in all of this. She was the original PI of institutionalizing this idea of research translation within AU. It's in the strategic plan. Vicki Wilkins, the provost, is now a co-PI on the grant. President Alger is deeply involved because we got him on the President's and Chancellor's Council on Public Impact Research, which one of our partners, Pew Charitable Trust, runs. So we've really worked on building on AU's commitment already in this space to kind of link this to the work that TRAC is trying to do, so that this is not just a one-off, but it's really amplifying and building AU's work in this area. And on the training, there are 5 types of trainings that we're going to offer: research communication, research translation, an overview of kind of program design and how to do this and measure it, tech transfer, and broader co-creation, so research practice partnerships. And so this is one direct way that you can engage. So in terms of engagement, if you want to be on our list and you're not already, please scan the QR code and we will send you information about our events. So you can engage by participating in trainings. We are also going to launch some TRAC fellows. We're still developing it, but the idea is to build and strengthen capacity within each unit at AU to pursue and support the broader mission of research translation, supporting it, validating it, and thinking about what each unit's particular interpretation of it is. We will have more seed grants. The seed grants have been focused more on the entrepreneurship side, meaning that NSF has been really interested in what are the kind of tangible outputs in terms of patents or commercialization, but you can also do licensing that you're not actually patenting. We have another recipient in the room of a TRAC seed grant who's working in that space, who is getting a patent, I believe, right? Maybe, okay, that's another part, okay. We are putting more resources on TRAC's website that talk about what the research in this space has, and to give you more tools in this space. And we'd love to work with you on helping to institutionalize this initial investment from NSF and something that can really benefit AU over time. Now we're going to go to some phenomenal examples, and we can answer any questions in the Q&A. All right, thanks everybody.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you all on this really important topic. Our research matters, yes, for knowledge's sake, but also because we want to improve people's lives, improve our planet, and so it is a wonderful thing to be a part of this TRAC grant. And my project is around establishing measures for an institutional designation for teaching excellence colleges and universities. And my apologies, our wonderful research assistant, who is now Dr. Peter Locher. I had originally thought this was virtual. He is not here, so my apologies, but he has definitely been a huge part of this project and wanted to acknowledge him. And just, you know, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but college teaching really does matter. It influences a massive variety of student outcomes, from critical thinking to moral reasoning to leadership development to civic engagement. It matters. It matters for students. It doesn't always matter in the ways that colleges and universities are ranked or valued. However, I had a wonderful opportunity over really the lifetime of my career up until this point to study college teaching and the different kinds of colleges and universities that support college teaching excellence. and spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to translate that information to higher education leaders, to policymakers, and to the public. And there really is good research, and it's not just my own. There's really, I mean, almost a century of research that shows that certain college teaching practices matter for student success. But unfortunately, before the track grant, I was not able to get this to take hold, the translation work. And so I want to say a huge thanks to the track team for helping to get this on track. The idea here was that this track grant would give me a seed grant to work with a couple institutions to develop proof points, because the funders, it was amazing. I was able to get like 10 funders to sit around the table. These were private major foundations to sit around the table with me to discuss the idea that we could potentially provide this information to students and families and higher ed leaders. But none of them would bite, because they would say, is this possible? You know, would institutions buy into this? Would faculty get on board with this? And so the track grant gave us that possibility. We also got one additional seed grant. So we've been working on this for a little over a year now, and we've been able to run the pilot measures on 2 institutional campuses. And I just want to mention, why now? Well, as you all know, I don't have to tell you, public trust in higher education is lower than it has been in the past. However, the evidence base on teaching excellence, as I mentioned, is very high. And because higher education leaders can sense this shift in the public trust, they are more open to proving to the public more than they have been in the past that what they're doing works and matters. And some of you who have seen me talk about this have seen this before. So, but I think it's one of the most important things, because it's shocking. It was really surprising to me. I got to put this question on a survey, which was basically, okay, you all know U.S. News rankings think that best universities have, you know, the most research expenditures and alumni who give to them and high SAT scores. But what does the public think makes the best university? And I thought, oh, for sure it will be the salary they make coming out, right? For sure it will be that. But actually, as it turns out, a cross-section of the American public, this is both with degrees and without degrees, across race, across both red and blue states, the results were similar. The highest thing was it has professors who are excellent teachers. And so the thing that is amazing is that with a little bit of seed funding, with a wonderful mentor that track paired me with, and also having had done a lot of the planting early seeds to get to this point, we were able to pilot at 2 universities. And we went back to that group of funders and said, okay, we have some wonderful pilot data for you. 30% of faculty agreed to be observed in their classrooms as a part of these measures. 20% of students surveyed responded, and we have policies that we can show you from these amazing universities. How does the funding look now? And they said, well, that sounds great, but you need a home. And so many thanks to American University and the new Baker School of Education. We now have the Advancing College Teaching for Student Success National Center, hosted at the Baker School of Education. And when we had that combination of a home for the work and some good proof points, we were able to secure more than $1 million in funding to, thank you. Thank you so much, to really have a broad, we will have 12 institutions and 20 higher education organizations such as the AAU, the AAC&U, and community colleges. It's a really wonderful network, including minority serving institutions. And so we've developed this national coalition to advise the work. And the advice is find a home, get some proof points, work with the track office, and just know that doing research that is not translation work values solo work, right? Single first author pieces. But when I'm doing my translation work, the only way that I can do it is in partnership, and the amount of time that I spend on actually doing the measures versus cultivating relationships with organizations and people, higher ed leaders, working with the media, has been just so much more on that side. If you want to learn more about the project, you can go to bettercollegeteaching.org. It's the first website that I've ever made that was meant to speak to broad audiences. And we have more than 200 students, families, and education consultants that are waiting for this list of institutions that we plan to release in 2 years. And we have more than 50 higher education, although we can only right now have funding for 12, we have 50 higher education institutions waiting for an opportunity to be a part of the designation. We also had the Chronicle of Higher Education highlight the work. And so it's a whole different way of communication, and I just want to thank you all for the opportunity and happy to talk more with any of you afterwards. Thanks so much.
Hi. Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present the activity of our institute and to show how we do research and policy. So I am Ignacio Gonzalez. I am the faculty co-director of IMPA, the Institute for Macro and Policy Analysis here at CIS in AU. And our institute is a research home to do macro research and to use research to also intervene in the policy debate, in particularly in macro and tax policy. So when we started the activity of the institute in 2023, the initial round of funding that we got was to build a policy model, okay, to be able to intervene in the DC tax debate, right? The central motivation of the funders and our motivation was that we realized that there was a big disconnect in the DC political and policy debate between how macroeconomics is done in academia, or the type of macro that is done through academic debates published in economic journals, and how is the macro policy debate in DC. So for example, a standard policy debate in DC, which affects a lot the way we understand taxes, typically relies on assumptions like perfect competition, right? That markets are totally competitive, right? And other assumptions like, for example, that there is a representative agent that somehow captures how the households behave in the economy. So there is a representative household, right? So that it limits a lot, okay, any tax policy analysis, and it also limits the ability to say something meaningful about the welfare implications of a policy intervention. And more importantly, okay, because I teach macro at the PhD level here at AU, and I know very well the macro models that these people use. We realize that many of these institutes and policy organizations in DC, they use these models and mechanically they bias conclusions against redistribution and progressive taxation. It's like part of the core in these models. Like, for example, you see an analysis evaluating an increase in corporate tax, and you automatically understand what is happening. That's always bad for the economy. Nobody talk about inequality, nobody talk about welfare. Everything is bad for economic growth. Therefore, this policy should be rejected by DC policymakers, right? That is the typical thing that was happening in DC tax policy debate. So, of course, that was creating a lot of frustration among progressive policy organizations, and they were interested in seeing if we could be able to build an alternative, like an alternative economic model that not only says something different to existing policy models, but also that relies more strongly on research. Okay, so our model, we work to build a model that incorporates income and wealth inequality, that takes heterogeneity seriously, that includes market power based on the latest macroeconomic literature on market power that introduces also the idea that public capital does something, right, that is productive, and other realistic assumptions that, of course, are going to affect the effect of taxes in the economy, the role of public investment, and also whatever we can say about welfare analysis. Okay, so we built our model. Okay, it took some time, of course. Like we spent almost 2 years working on this. We were strongly relying on our academic work, on our work that we have published in academic journals, and using this model, okay, and everything that we learned through the process, we have been intervening in the policy discussion in DC in the last 2 years, let's say. So we've been doing that through policy reports, analyzing policy interventions using our model. What is for example, the macroeconomic effect or the inequality effects of an increase in the corporate tax, for example. Then we have like a lot of reports analyzing different tax figures. We have also intervened in the policy debate through op-eds, like for example, here is the link which you can find in our website, op-ed that we published with Professor Joseph Stiglitz, which I guess many of you know is a Nobel Prize winner in economics. He was also the mentor of two of the members of, including myself, of the institute. Okay. We have also intervened through academic events, like and also policy events, okay, addressed to different audiences, and also through closed-door discussions with different policy groups in DC. Okay, so how has been our activity received in these 2 years? So we can, for example, we can divide the outcomes of our intervention in 3 blocks, right? So first, we intervene like through several pieces, right? During the 2024 election cycle, okay? All the policy proposals, not all of course, but some of the policy proposals that were in the policy discussion, in the political discussion at the time. So we wrote reports analyzing some of them. These reports receive citations and appearances in some media outlets that you can recognize, most of them specialized outlets analyzing policy in DC. Okay, so in these reports that receive this coverage, we basically talk about tax policy, inequality, and macroeconomic effects of different campaign proposals. Okay, so we have all these reports in our website. So it was well received. Okay, so we got citations in the Atlantic, Bloomberg, but the audience was still specialized. Our most successful policy intervention was when we decided, it was pretty actually random because it was Juan, the other co-director, and me one day talking in our office saying, okay, we need to say something about the budget cuts to science like that this administration is proposing. You know, just like try to see what the academic literature says about that, and try to use our model to incorporate some estimates about the effect of these cuts on productivity, innovation, economic growth. So we talk we are not experts on that particular topic, but we talk with experts in that particular topic, people that are publishing very well in top 5, top field journals in the profession, and we were able to produce a very good report on this matter, and we got the exclusive from the New York Times. It was a big surprise for us, and I think we learned a lot. I think about the importance of timing, like when you have something to say that is ongoing in the policy discussion, and that creates an opportunity. And then, however, this was not the most comprehensive project. The most comprehensive project was the analysis of the OB3 Act, the big tax reform that the Trump administration passed last summer. Okay, so that was, we received, the purpose of the funding that we received originally was to do this type of work, okay? So we were very prepared to intervene in this debate, and I think it is our best piece of work, but sometimes, your best piece of work is not the one that receives the most attention. Still, we got mentions in Politico and other media outlets, and I was a little bit frustrated at the time because we spent a lot of time, much more than the time we spent on the piece that received the coverage from the New York Times. But now I'm realizing that even though the initial policy impact was limited, now, like, for example, we are receiving still calls, like, to intervene in debates, thanks to this piece of work that is a paper that is available and many people are reading. So we still receive invitations, and there is still opportunities for policy engagement from this work. So what are the lessons that we have learned from all this, from these 2 years of policy activity? So having policy impact as researchers is very difficult, particularly when you do that in your tenure track. I don't recommend it. It's a little bit crazy. Now I realize I should have never done this, but it's not impossible, and I have learned a lot. So one of the things that I have learned is that there are many powerful players in DC that have very deep pockets, and it's very difficult to compete with them. And they are not particularly sophisticated, like intellectually speaking. And actually, I would say many of the models that are around that, of course, receive a lot of media attention, they are very simple models, very biased towards certain policy outcomes. And they receive media attention because they are able to sell their product very well. Okay, they have a lot of money, so all the part that has to do with selling the product, like they are very good at that. So of course, at selling, we have a lot of things to improve in our institute. I would say that institutional communication support from AU, particularly from CIS, has been essential for amplifying the impact of our activity. And when you are competing with powerful players that have a lot of DC presence and receive corporate money, our strategy to not get too frustrated is to try to remain very rigorous, like transparent and academically grounded. So every time that we do something, we cite papers that are the papers that have to be cited in that topic. I don't see that is the common practice in the policy debates in DC. So you have like institutes that have a lot of influence. They are politically leaning towards what you can imagine, and they publish a number, a table, and you have to imagine how they get this number, but they don't justify anything, okay? And of course they get like a lot of attention from media, no? So when you are competing with that, first of all, don't get frustrated. Second, in our opinion, is to be as academic as possible. Okay, knowing that you are doing policy, so you cannot write the same way you write when you write a paper, but try to be as academically grounded as possible. Also, we learned that the strong partners matter a lot. We are a very new institution. All the members of the institute are very young, so I'm the oldest in mine. So strong partners matter. Like, for example, we've been collaborating with Initiative for Policy Dialogue at Columbia University, which is the institute of Professor Stiglitz, and that gives us the opportunity to intervene in debates that we wouldn't be able to do it by ourselves. Policy engagement requires substantial time and energy, so we learned that the only way to do this is that you are using what you have learned from your research, so that you complement your policy analysis and reinforce it with your academic research agenda. And finally, something that has helped us a lot is to give sense to what we do as academics. Like sometimes, I guess many of you also feel the same way, like you feel that what you do doesn't have a lot of sense, like, or you are like, you are always wondering whether someone is reading your work, like, so this activity, okay, through the Institute has given us a lot of sense of purpose, like, and at least we feel that we are doing academic research to do something that goes beyond publishing papers. Yeah, that's something that we have learned, and I wanted to share with you. So thank you. You can visit our website for more information about the team and the work and research we've been doing.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Ignacio. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ernesto Castañeda. If you missed the launch session, if you want to stand up, stretch a little bit, I don't take it personal, please feel free. It's been a long day with a lot of interesting presentations. It's great to follow my colleagues. I think it's going to follow very nicely. A couple of questions for you. What is more or less, ballpark, the percentage of international migrants in the world today? Who will say more than 20%? Raise your hand. People that were born in a country and live in a different country now, like me, more than 20%, okay. Who says less than 10%? Okay, Rachel, all right. What is the percentage of people born in another country in the US today? More than 30%, raise your hand. Less than 10%? All right, so in the US today, which is kind of highest, we haven't been here since like 1930, it's around 15% of the US population who are born abroad, including researchers, international students, undocumented migrants, etc. And around the world is less than 4%. So most people don't know that. And again, I do this with all types of audiences, and very rarely people get it right. So it's an example to show what my colleagues were saying. There's a big gap between what the public knows, and the public including college graduate people that went to college a long time ago, people with PhDs, migrants, and what the empirical record, what we know about immigration. There's like hundreds of scholars around the world that have studied the history of immigration, how immigration works as a process, what are the impacts of immigration, what are the consequences, the costs. We know a lot of that in our libraries. Very few academics know the whole thing, it's hard, but a team of scholars and immigration centers in many universities, they know a lot, but then the public doesn't, right? So part of it is the ignorance and how we have to continuously educate, not only in our classrooms, but also once people graduate, which is hard. How you do it. So one would be, people are not gonna read academic books or academic journals, right? They cannot access our library if they are not alumni or they don't know how the library works and they're not Rachel or librarians here. Then how do you do it, right? So you can do open access books that don't have a lot of literature review or lingo. So we publish with students a book based on interviews with immigrants. They are thematic. One chapter, for example, is the role of religion, people that had to bring their 2-year-olds and cross the Darien jungle in Panama, and many of them die in the process. They can see cadavers along the way. Then they have to go to Central America in buses, walking, go through Mexico and face being stopped, kidnapped by the police or by organized crime or by smugglers. So very few can make it to our border and ask asylum. Some of them came in during the Biden administration and we interviewed them. Some of them are in the process of being removed, right, or are in detention. So we tell their stories through this book. But it's a book, it's like 200 pages, right? So who's gonna have the time? So we're trying to create the audiobook so more people can do it while they do the dishes and things like that. But it's hard, right? So again, there's this gap. How can we address it? Because we have the research, we have the knowledge, but the public doesn't. And again, it's not just about the public being ignorant, but the public is voting and supporting policy decisions that have real impacts on our economies, on our societies, in our schools, in our campus, etc. Why is this happening? As Ignacio was saying, there's very well-funded think tanks in Washington, D.C. and other places that have been feeding this information to the public for over 20 years, creating this specter of undocumented migrants as criminals, although we know that the crime rate of the foreign-born is much lower than for citizens. It's not zero. So yes, you're going to find stories that you can hear on Fox News, but it's not, the rate, which is very important for scientists, is much lower. So I have a book called Immigration Realities, where I debunked 10 myths about immigration, but it's very academic, right? Each chapter cites hundreds of studies. So it's good for journalists, it's good for researchers, maybe for a class, but it's dry. The public is not going to read it. So how do we do it, right? So that's the challenge that we have in the Immigration Lab and the Center. How do we translate all the knowledge that we have as scholars of immigrations in different disciplines, in different countries, in different times, so that the public can have a better informed opinion about immigration? Because again, immigrants, sometimes they have anti-immigrant feelings, right? Sometimes people with PhDs, if you're not an expert in immigration, you're not supposed to know everything about immigration. But again, this is an issue that everybody has an opinion about it, and it's so politicized that it's important to continue this education. So that's what we do. So kind of following on what Ignacio was saying about just creating different models and trying to make this splash in the media, we did an exercise a couple of years ago where we know that immigrants send money home because many of them come here, they leave their families behind, they leave their children, they take care of other children here so that their children can have a better life back in the Philippines, in Mexico, in El Salvador, in India, you name it. We know, according to the World Bank, so very solid, very official figures, that in 2022, there were $80 billion that left the United States and went to countries around the world that immigrants were sending, right? For the right, back in the first administration, there was an argument about taxing them. If you tax those remittances, people wouldn't send the money because that money was escaping the US economy. So in that book that we published, Economic University Press, Immigration Myths, we said that taxes was going to be a bad idea. Well, this administration proposed in the Big Beautiful Bill a 5% tax, but then the Western Union, the companies that make a lot of money from these, the consulates of Mexico and embassies and places argued and brought it down to 1%. And people have read my book that were in those rooms and were making these arguments, that if people are sending remittances, how are they getting that money from? 99% of them. If you send money home, how do you get that money? You're an adult immigrant worker. Because you have a job, right? So if you have a job from your income, you support your kids. Many of us do that, right? Or your mother or your sibling, or you pay your rent, etc. It's the same thing with immigrants, but it happens across borders. So if you are getting an income, 99% or 90% of immigrants are paying taxes. Many of them don't get a tax return. Many of them don't get Social Security, but they're paying into it. So that income is already taxed. So when you tax the remittance, you're doing double taxation, which is illegal in the US tax code and is illegal around the world. But still, the government is doing that right now. But there was an arrangement that you will only be taxed if you send it via cash. But if you send it through a bank account and all that, you won't be taxed. But what is happening right now, Homeland Security is making it illegal for people that don't have papers to anymore have bank accounts. They're trying to clamp them down. So there's a persecution of immigrants on the false belief that the money that they are sending home is exiting the US economy. But then thinking as a sociologist, I said, okay, what if we do a model and we think about it anyway, right? So they're sending $81 billion abroad. It's a lot of money, I agree. If they're sending all that money, how are they making it? They're working, right? So if they're working, let's assume they make the minimum wage, right? How much are they making in salary? Very simple math, very, very simple math. If they're making that money, it means that their employers are profiting because that's why they're hiring, or else they cannot pay their income, right? They cannot pay their wages. So we just assume that, let's say, many of them are scientists like us, but let's assume they're working in food preparation, in construction, agriculture, and in those businesses, around 30% of the income, not the profits, but the income of a business goes into the payroll, the labor. So just making that calculation, very simple math, we came up to a conclusion that we published in the conversation that had some impact, that in 2022, the foreign-born, some of them documented, some of them undocumented, produced $2.2 trillion in the US economy. How much is that? Is that a little? Is that a lot? What percentage of the US economy is that? You shouldn't know that. Now I know that it's 8%. So if we deported all those foreigners, again, we're talking construction, not the scientists here, but if we deport them, the US will decrease its economy by 8%. We've been growing 3.5% in the last few years. So an 8% hole in the pocket will be in a horrible economic recession. So another way to put it, out of the 2.2 trillion that immigrants here produce, they only send 81 or $82 billion. That's only 4%. So 4% leaves, but 96% of the wealth created that wouldn't be here if immigrants were not here Where does that money stay? Here, paying food, paying rent, producing innovation, producing patents, producing all these things. So the US or Mexico or Chile, any country receiving immigrants is a net benefiter of that. So if anything else, another example of the developing world subsidizing wealth creation, innovation, scientific progress, etc., in wealthy countries like ours. So as an example that we were able to create a very simple graph that was in the conversation that some newspapers cited. It still is not the mainstream way that people see remittances, but for a lot of journalists, it made sense, right? So like that, we try to translate what's happening with what we know. Now, sometimes we want to lead the discussion and say, I have a new paper, hey, everybody read it and write about it. That doesn't really happen. I have another book, thank you. I have a pile of books at home, I'm not going to read it, don't give it to me. But journalists have questions all the time. Something is happening in Maryland, and they want to know what is the impact, right? The journalist contacted me a few days ago. It's like, oh, so they said they're going to send more ICE agents to Baltimore. What is going to be the consequence of that? And I was like, well, I mean, I don't live in Baltimore. I haven't studied, I haven't published on Baltimore. But I know, because I heard the mayor, and I gave a talk a couple of months ago, and I know that Baltimore has been losing population for a number of decades. The stories that you know, the population, white flight, the industrialization, disinvestment in black communities, the things that we know very well. So Baltimore was getting poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer because of all these policies and practices. But in the last few major shifts, they've been trying to bring asylum seekers, refugees, and immigrants to grow the population again. And finally, last year, they had grown, the population of a city had grown. So I have a book that I just published on Amazon, self-published, with a lot of book chapters that I wrote for different edited volumes. I just put them together in cover, and it's a book. And the argument of that book is that immigrants make cities wealthier and make cities grow. Because if you're a city, you're like DC. You have growing pains, and there's construction, there's new people moving in, more students at EU, it's a good thing, right? Because otherwise, like a city or a university, if you have less population, if you have less students, it's not good for us, right? So that's the choice of policy that cities have. You want to be picky and have less people? Well, good luck to you. That's where we are right now, policy-wise in the US. It's bad for everybody. So that's the argument that we're making in that book, that again is concurrent with a lot of the empirical knowledge we have from research, but very few people are making such a simple argument. And it's so simple, you'll be like, what is Ernesto talking about? He's probably lying. He's not telling the truth. There must be something more complex here. But immigration is very simple. Immigration is a win-win for the immigrants, for the countries of origin, and for the countries that receive them. But we make it so difficult, so many people suffer and lose their lives trying to migrate, where we're talking about 4% of the population. 3% of US residents are undocumented. We shouldn't spend such a big chunk of our budget on that issue. So that's what I try to talk to the media. And the last point that I will make is that it's not me driving the conversation. A lot of the time is the journalists asking me questions. So I was looking at my CV these days with elements and all that. And in my career, but it's mainly been in the last few years, I've been on TV or on radio or interview over 1,000 times. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that I've been cited 1,000 times. It's a lot. I wish I could stop. It takes a lot of time. I wish I didn't have to do it anymore. But the public still doesn't know these basic things. In my immigration classes, we don't cover the basics. Most people don't take an immigration class at college. So we have to talk to the media so we can educate the public about what is very obvious for many of you as specialists in your areas, but that the public doesn't know about the importance of education, about the importance of, you can think of a policy that is more progressive, about the importance of like translating what's happening in the ivory tower. So you can all do that. It's actually something that is not only easy, but it's important. It's not easy, it's hard, but it's important because I think Stiglitz thinks of public knowledge as a commons good, as something that belongs to everybody. And it's like, Stiglitz will say that if you light somebody's candle, you have a candle, and you light somebody else's candle, your candle doesn't dissipate because you're sharing that energy. More people are enlightened. So again, the more people that know the information, the better outcomes for everybody. So as educators, spreading the knowledge is important. It's part of our goal, but doing it in the classroom is not enough. That's why translation is so important. Thank you, guys.
Hi, Ben Stokes, and I want to give you something a little different as we think about translation. We're talking about incredibly important information, really inspiring to hear all of the different remarks. Where do young people get their information? It'd be no surprise that most young people, the primary source for news is phones and social media. And good and bad news, does an American university education change that so that people do not use social media? No, it doesn't change that. Anecdotally, because I've talked to a lot of students, I've been in programs where there is intensive news engagement. Our country is not about to suddenly make a massive investment in news. In fact, for a long time, news wasn't really funded by news, it was funded by classifieds, right? So there's always been a weird indirect relationship between our information sources and our engagement. And I want to talk about another indirect relationship. I want to argue that if we're going to think about the future of translation, we should be thinking about game design. It's a weird thing to say. People are like, wait, what do you mean game design? I came to AU, we were talking about 10 years ago, partly because AU was starting a new initiative around games as part of AU 2030, for those of you that remember that. It was one of our bets about how AU could think ahead in interesting ways. And I would say that in some ways, the bet has paid off in some ways, but one of the ways in which it hasn't paid off is the rest of our society is still figuring out what games mean. And I think that it's in some ways a really good investment for us, both in terms of what the future of the average person in the United States should know as a baseline for education, but it's also an investment in terms of thinking well about translation. And let me give you a couple reasons. First, games are really old, but when we talk to young people, they think, oh, they're new, right? But of course, we don't know of any culture that's ever been studied in history that doesn't have games as part of what they do. So games are actually really old, but we've, as universities, really opposed teaching or studying them. Why? Because what we thought we should do when undergrads come here is fill them up with knowledge. Thankfully, AU, I think, has started to shift away from that. Our gen ed requirements really shifted towards more of an inquiry model. Lots of other controversy around that. But in general, there's been a recognition that if our goal is to lay a foundation for undergrads by teaching them facts, especially in a world of devices where they can look things up quickly, we are really actually not doing a core service. But I would argue that in some ways, some of the tension that we have around engaging with knowledge and information is that we still think of it as a thing we should push out rather than help people craft their own systems and models. There's still a sense that we are the experts, we're going to figure out the models, and we'll help educate the journalists who will then start to educate the people. And in some ways, it's not a terrible model, but if we're thinking about democracy, perhaps we should think about, can the people come up with some of their own models, engage with media on their own, and how can those models be in conversation with our models? That sounds very abstract until you realize how well is our current information ecosystem working, and does that tie into things like presidential elections? I would argue we are in a total crisis right now with the models that people are coming up with on their own, with social media, about what is going on in our country. Yes, big money is a factor in some of this, but it's also that we are living in a society where we are not just being governed by laws, but we are being governed by code. Code is structuring so many things. How many of us are carrying a computer around? By computer, now I mean phone. We don't even use the same term, but that is a computer, and that is structuring how we navigate through streets, that is structuring which restaurants we pick, that is structuring how we do payments. If I send Venmo to another country, there are so many things that are being structured by code, and I would argue that should be a core part of how we're doing our education right now. So what have I been doing? Let me just talk a little about translation research into action. I've been working on a grant funded by MLS, which is has been until quite recently the federal agency that funded museums and libraries in our country. The recent administration, that was deemed an unnecessary thing we don't need to be doing. An attempt was made to zero out the IMLS budget that was kind of clawed back in some ways. But we got in kind of before some of that. It's a relatively modest grant, $250,000, to work with libraries around the country and help them make small games around local history and civic issues tied to their communities. Why does this matter? Well, I would argue that there's actually really good evidence that local libraries are at the heart of our current democracy. They are the most widely available civic institution at the neighborhood level. If you want to walk into a civic building that actually has doors open that says come in and you can do something, the public library infrastructure, that is it. And our resource investment in these buildings is so tiny that when I started doing some of my work with libraries, I remember particularly an interview with a librarian in Philadelphia who had done some really interesting work with Pokemon Go and redirecting the hordes of people that were coming around to the neighborhood to say, we have these amazing murals in Philadelphia, city of murals in many ways, lots of great public art, people that just walk right by it. And they were, in some ways, connecting Pokemon Go to local history with some Poke crawls, they called them. There were some walks. It was incredibly intergenerational. One of the things they said was that it was parents and really young kids that would do this kind of activity together. It is really hard to do intergenerational programming at libraries. And importantly, it's getting harder and harder. We're having more activities that are for older people, and we have activities for younger people. Lots of great game design happening in libraries, by the way, for young people, none for adults. Adults don't need to learn anything about game design, even though we know actually adults spend huge amounts of money on games and play games. It's weird, it's gendered, there's weird identity stuff. If you ask a young woman, do you play games? She might insist that she doesn't. No, that's just a thing I do on my phone, because the identity politics are so intense. People are like, I'm not a gamer. They'll say, I am not a gamer. I just do this thing that happens to be a game a lot of hours. This is part of the inconsistencies that we have at deep cultural levels. And I would argue that if we're going to be honest, even the average AU graduate right now still can't define what a game mechanic is. We don't teach it. We don't ask people to build these kind of systems that are playful and have an audience with others. We at best have them build models in statistics programs that are just for themselves. The interesting thing about games to me is that they are a model with an audience. You build something in there, it has a feedback loop, it is about the choices that you are offering the participant, but it has an audience as you're doing that work. It is, I think, the liberal art of interaction design. If you want to teach kind of liberal art about how you do interactivity, I think games are the place to start, and it is not about coding. It is not about teaching people to go into STEM fields. It can be totally humanities. It can be totally on the STEM side. Really, all of those start to come together in interesting interdisciplinary ways when you start to build games. And librarians, as we found as we started training them around the country, are terrible at making games. They're really terrible. The games they make feel exactly like librarian websites. One of the things that we learned in our research is they immediately take the first person out of it. Apologies to any librarians in the room. But they immediately don't want it to make I statements. They want to talk about the sources and the information and what the information says. But can you imagine talking to a person like this in actual conversation? You meet them at a happy hour and they just refuse to ever take a stance on anything, and they just provide references to other things. It's just like not how actual human engagement works in some ways, although it's really important for information credibility. So we had to do this interesting brokering of how do we help them stay true to their information sources, but also think about public engagement, because the reason they signed up for this program, and we ended up training libraries in over 50 cities around the 50 cities and towns, a lot of them were small towns and rural places, in how to make games around their own local history. They are desperate to figure out how they can go beyond their library's walls. They recognize the future of libraries is not what it once was. It's not about housing information, because otherwise you can't get books. We all know this. Everyone's like, oh yeah, that part of libraries is totally gone, or at least not totally gone. In fact, we know that the library reading goes up when they engage beyond their walls. Book circulation goes up when they start doing other interesting things. But the future of libraries is significantly around engaging with their communities in different ways. Libraries are becoming the hub where if you want to organize a meeting around something civic and for the public purpose, you often use that space, the infrastructure, the network building, the kind of reputational gains that you have from doing something in a library feels really different. And I think that that's a really interesting space to begin design. Of course, right, it's easy to be tempted to think about games as a commercial enterprise where the goal is to get rich or sell them to lots of people. But I would argue, just as that's hopefully not the future of print or video, it should also be not the future of games. And the kind of games that I think our country really needs ties back to communities and people in all the places we are. So this research that we've been doing asks, how can we teach ordinary communities about game design, engaging the public around things like local history. The games themselves, people are probably still like, what do they mean? What does he mean even? What do these games look like? They could be something like texting with a statue. And the statue might text back something to you. And of course, it shouldn't change the historical record. But if there's a personality associated with the statue and it acknowledges that personality, it can kind of take on a voice, take on a bit of perspective, reveal some interesting history as it tells that story. This texting is a really interesting form of technology, by the way. It's one that the industry has mostly decided is not worth any money. So if you try to find commercial games made for texting, you can't find them because people don't want to pay a lot of money for it. But it turns out there's lots of forms of engagement that are not driven by the market. That's part of the goal for translation.